Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the extra nuggets and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the Ukraine war. Where should we go to first? Well, you may remember from the other day I reported that Sweden are giving Ukraine about 12 Archer self-propelled guns. Someone was speaking to me or putting a comment on my thread on the YouTube video I released talking about this, and I thought I would delve a little bit further into the Archer and why it's such a good bit of kit. So it's been it's designed between 1995 and 2009. It's been produced since 2010 onwards, so it's a pretty recent piece of kit, and it is arguably the fastest firing SPG there is. So this guy, Scruffy, says on my thread, the Archer is a guerrilla fighter. There's a YouTube video showing how quickly it can send 3 155mm rounds downrange and be on the move again in 60 to 70 seconds without the crew leaving the vehicle. Counter battery radar can never zero in on it. Enemy special forces will have a hard time locating them. With a quick reloading, the Archer can meet up with logistics. Everyone disperses and the Archer relocates to shoot while the supply trucks moves on to help another Archer. This is not static artillery that is easily countered, scouted, and where logistics can be intercepted. And then Terje Ozerberg says he saw the video. It's pretty impressive. I believe the speed is what makes a HIMARS so effective. With slower systems, you have to stay out of artillery range of the front lines. With your MLRS systems 30 to 50 kilometers from the front lines, their range is reduced by 30 to 50 kilometers. The HIMARS, therefore, have effectively twice the range of other MLRS systems. The Archer is even faster than the HIMARS. It shoots in less than a minute. So was it 3? It shoots in less than a minute. The artillery isn't even halfway to its targets before they've already gone, rendering counter battery impossible. So what counter battery does is when you fire a shell, an artillery round, and it has a ballistic trajectory, the counter artillery battery sort of radar system works out the trajectory of that shell and works out exactly where it's come from. And once it's worked that out, it will then relay that information back to the artillery pieces in the area, and they will then send their artillery back to that back to the source of that shell. So there are some people saying you need to be out there in 3 minutes, 6 minutes, somewhere around that time period. Depends how well the counter battery is operating. You need to be gone. So if you're using a towed howitzer, I mean, think about that. You're going to set off 1, maybe 2 shells, 3 shells, and then you're going to have to up and go. And even then, you're cutting it pretty fine to get that hooked back onto a truck and then to drive away. So these shoot and scoot pieces are really important, where you can fire and then shoot off almost straight away. So with the Archer, you don't even need to get out of the vehicle. You can fire this all from within the vehicle. So let's have a little look at that. Here's what the Archer system is. There's an 8-wheel version. This looks like a 6-wheel version. But it's the 8-wheel version that I think they're sending, and this shows you just how quickly it can fire. I know they're all cut, but it can fire like 3 in a minute. It's just in case I get done. And it can carry. I mean, this particular one can carry 126 rounds, so it has 126 loaded in there. Oh, sorry, 126. What are they called? Charge magazines. So these kind of things that allow the kind of explosive bit that sends a shell up. These bits. So it has 126 of them. It has 21 rounds loaded in. So they can all be loaded in. So it can fire, and then drive off. You don't need to reload it. But if you do need to reload it, then it takes less than 8 minutes to do so. These are really, really useful bits of kit, and then they can shoot off, toot sweet and get out of there in quick time. So that's a 6-wheel version. The Ukrainians are getting the 8-wheel version, as I say. This is Dom Nichols talking about it on Ukraine's latest podcast.
World Archer is a self-propelled 155mm howitzer on a wheeled 6x6 Volvo chassis, so you know it's going to get there.
He's talking about 6x6. I'm fairly sure they mentioned 8x8, but okay, either way.
even if it's playing ABBA the whole time. The crew and the engine compartments are armoured, including bullet and frag-resistant windows, and the whole thing can be operated without the crew coming out of that armoured compartment. It can be bombed up, so resupplied by a support vehicle, for which they have to get out, but that takes less than 10 minutes. But the vehicle carries 21 rounds of 155 mil in a fully automatic magazine, so all of those can go without the crew even having to expose themselves to fire. Rate of fire is good, about 8 or 9 rounds a minute, and it's got, as some other modern systems like Caesar does, the French Caesar system, multiple round simultaneous impact mode, meaning it can fire several shells. If you imagine the barrel pointing straight up, firing a round slightly lower, firing another round slightly lower, firing another round slightly lower, so on and so forth, then those rounds, because of the ballistic trajectory, they're going to land on the target, or it can be computed so that all those rounds land on the target at the same time, which not only gives huge shock effects downrange at the target end, and it's that shock effect of artillery that really kills. It's those first few seconds of rounds going off before people can get into cover and vehicles can.
What that's saying is these rounds can be manipulated in such a way that they'll be fired at different one after the other, but they'll land at the same time, and that then stops people being able to basically run away. If you're getting rounds landing on the spot, 10 meters that way, 10 meters that way, then fantastic. Like Bosch, that's taking out that whole area, or all landing on the same spot, or whatever. They're landing at the same time. Whereas if you fire them consecutively in a way that there's a big gap between them and they land consecutively, then one round hits, everyone thinks, right, we've got to run away from here. So everyone then runs away, and then the other lands here, and you've already run away or got cover or whatever. So this is a really clever bit of kit.
And get the hell out of the way. So it's that shock effect in the first few seconds that makes artillery such a killer. So that is good that these rounds all arrive at the same time. It also means that the vehicle, the Archer, can get out of the way before return fire arrives. And the rough metric these days, although it's pretty accurate, it seems to be pretty accurate, is that you can expect return fire to come down on you within 3 minutes of firing, and this type of ammunition. So that's what physics and radars and all the rest of it means these days. The battlefield is a very, very dangerous place. A point I make when we talk about towed artillery that then needs to be hooked up and moved away by another vehicle. So self-propelled artillery is the kind of name of the game, really. Now, Archer, the range, the main gun, it's standard shell 30 kilometers, 40 Ks with base bleed. Now, base bleed is a technique whereby the artillery shell allows basically, if you can imagine, like when you're driving a car, you get all the drag behind the car, the way the air moves over the vehicle and sort of then collects in the back. That can slow down, microscopically slows down your vehicle. It does the same thing, exactly the same thing with ballistic shells. So base bleed allows a little bit of, forgive me for the technical details of sort of Janet and John here, but allows a little bit of air to bleed out the back of or around the back of the shell, so you don't have that base drag as it goes through the air. Now that can extend the range by about 20 or 30%, which takes it up to about 40k. Archer can also fire Excalibur out to about 50k, Excalibur being a precision-guided artillery round. So very, very capable artillery system.
I've heard 60k, but yeah.
Sweden, we think, has about 24 versions of the B model, about 48 of all variants in service. And so we're not sure what's going, but we think it might be the B. They'd spoken earlier on, or on October last year, Swedish MOD was saying they were talking about sparing 12. So we would imagine a minimum of 12. And they have today said that more detail on the CV90.
So that's 12. I've heard someone mention 20, but not sure. So there is an 8-wheel version of it. So I think it's the 8-wheel version that's going, but again, I could be wrong. And it looks rather like that, so like the other one, but with 2 more wheels. That's how mass works. And yeah, so that's going to be a hugely advantageous piece of kit for the Ukrainians to have, and it's this kind of competitive advantage that Ukraine have over the forces, over the Russian forces, that might well give them an edge over a protracted war. Especially with regard to the range of this equipment. So if they can have these sat back behind, even like behind counter battery fire, so it doesn't even matter whether they've got counter battery locked on, they haven't got the distance, the range on their artillery to hit this, then that's great. Or they can move them right up to the front lines, do a quick shoot and scoot, and get off, 3 rounds or whatever, and then or if they can shoot 3 rounds in a minute, then that's actually 9 rounds they can do before having to get out of there. So this is really good for the Ukrainians. Anyway, moving on, I've just had a comment on another video, but from a Spanish person. So Alvaro Chamac here says, gives an interesting insight into Spaniards. I don't know whether this is representative, but he says it's representative, certainly of people he knows. You and I, as you're watching this, if you're watching this, you are fairly obsessed with Ukraine, right? I am obsessed with Ukraine. People in Britain have Ukraine fairly high on the agendas, and we get quite a lot of media about it, and we're quite concerned with it. And it is a big news piece, but other countries is not necessarily the case. And this guy says, as a Spaniard, I can explain why the aversion to send arms why there's an aversion to send arms in Germany. Many in Germany, France, Italy, and Spain think that this is an Anglo proxy war with some ex-Soviets against Russia. All the wars that the West has fought or proxy fought in the last decades, Afghan, Libya, Yemen, Syria, etc., have been led by the USA, UK, and sometimes Canada. That's why it is difficult to explain to the people that have witnessed this NATO wars that this time the war is different. Think that our lefts have a strong tradition of being anti-NATO. In Spain, our far left, Podemos, former leader, was an Iranian TV presenter, and in here there have been conferences and support from far left and anti-fascists for the Donbass for years. Also, on the other political positions, a conservative right or far right, people in these countries feel the war distant, does not support much Ukraine nor Russia. So obviously this is English as a second language. So, and some feel this is a woke war to expand the woke control of the West. Which is funny. I mean, like, that sounds ridiculous, but actually that's the narrative that Russia is leaning into. It's like these LGBT Satanists and all this kind of stuff. And if you want Ukraine, if you support Ukraine and all their LGBT woke Satanism, then and you want your children to be taken away and all this kind of stuff, and you're thinking, really? But that's the kind of narrative that they're expounding. I've tried this to explain this as neutrally as I can, says Alvaro. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And he says, I can honestly say, in reply to me, I can honestly say people around here don't care much about the war. Nobody talks about it on a daily basis. At the beginning, there was interest, but it has been fading. Rises in prices is the thing people talk and are mad about. This is the idea that inflation and this is what Russia want, is like the daily challenges to people in all of these allied countries will eventually lead to a change in focus and support for Ukraine fading off and dying, and Russia have much greater ability. So the theory is to withstand the war over a long period. So they can win if it is a protracted war and we all get bored and stop supporting Ukraine. And as this guy from Spain says, in a sense, that's already happening. But we shall see whether that's reflected in the corridors of power in Spain, of course. Now, I spoke to you about the Ukrainians having a much better killed in action to wounded in action ratio, as in they have more wounded to killed. So if you had 10,000 killed in action, you might have 30,000 wounded, 40,000 total, as a ratio of 1 to 3. Okay, so 3 times as many people are wounded than killed, which is better. You want more wounded than killed if you're talking, if your metric is about survival and those people coming to fight again and just simply living. The Russians have much worse. Some people saying as bad as 1 to 1.3 killed in action to wounded in action. Well, why is that? And there's a lot of talk about the golden hour, which is the hour after you get injured, needing really good emergency provision to allow you to live. If you get that provision outside of that hour, your chances of living are far, far, far reduced. So this is called the golden hour. And some people talk about the platinum 5 minutes. If you get medical care within 5 minutes from someone who's medically trained in your unit or whatever, then you have an even greater chance of surviving. For obvious reasons, staunching that blood, putting tourniquet on, whatever it might be. And it turns out the Ukrainians have those at company level. So they have these experts embedded with the troops that can provide that provision with far fewer troops. It might be 100 troops or whatever, rather than with the Russian mobilized troops maybe not having that expertise at all, leaving their people to die, not being able to get that medical provision to those people really, really quickly. Now, the Ukrainians not only have those embedded in the forces, but they have also got innovation. They've got vehicles that are coming in, and they've also, because it's kind of their own country and they've sorted this out, they've got, I think, pretty decent medical facilities going back that have been sorted out to aid the front line, the front lines in a way that I don't think the Russians have behind their front lines. They have some main hospitals sort of apparently completely overcrowded, and there is the problem obviously with a huge number of injuries for the Ukrainians as well in certain areas. But this is a sort of video that helps you to understand what the Ukrainians are doing that the Russians aren't. So a video showing the upgrades and stretcher modification we've made to turn a standard Nissan Pathfinder into a Bakhmut-ready frontline evacuation vehicle. These cars will take wounded soldiers from where the fighting is to where they can get proper treatment, saving lives. And this guy, there's been a lot of help. This guy sounds Australian, and he's got an Australian hat. I didn't notice that before. How stupid of me. But I know that there are people in the UK also doing this and sending out. I don't know if they're doing it in medical wise, but there's an awful lot of help with vehicles from lots of countries around Europe, and in this case,
okay,
well,
it's day
check out
three.
what he says.
We're going to take off shortly, but I thought I'd show you around the cars and what we've done and how we've converted them. They're all Nissan Pathfinders, so we kept all the work standard. We've raised the suspensions. If you have a look down here, they've gone up. All new suspension. We've gone up 30 centimeters. We put the mud tires on. We've tested them on off-road conditions. They're fantastic. And then you come down the back, you see where all the magic has happened. So we've taken the front passenger seat out, the rear passenger seat. So we've got a spot still for the medic. And then we've built this stretcher system. You can see in there the mounts for it. So this transports the patient from where they're injured, slides straight into the car and locks in place. Great thing about the Pathfinder, 7-seater. So when the stretcher's not in use, we can pop the back seats up and we can transport 2 people in the back, the medic and the driver. So we can still get people who aren't, don't need the stretcher in and out. It's a fantastic car. The platform's been really good. We've replaced the clutch, alternator, batteries, belts, done anything that's failed on us in previous trips. We've replaced on all the vehicles. Really important to give the Army guys a car that's not going to break down on them. So when you buy a car that's got 150,000 kilometres on it, stuff like clutches go pretty quick, and they can go at any time. So yeah, they're in really good condition. The stretcher system, we think is going to be a game changer, and yeah, we're really happy with the end product. Okay.
So that's fantastic. That's the sort of thing that is really useful for the Ukrainians, will save lives, will affect that kind of ratio that I was talking about, and is something that the Russians don't appear to be doing. Great. Okay. Moving on to air support. So the Dutch announced recently that they could supply the Ukrainians with Dutch F-16 fighters, pretty much at the end of their lives, but still very useful for the Ukrainians to have. So Justin Bronk from the Royal United Services Institute has a little chat about this. He's written some amazing reports, or co-authored a bunch of amazing reports for the Russie. So well worth looking, and I've actually drawn on them a number of times. Anyway, he says the Ukrainian Air Force would absolutely benefit greatly from Western fighters in terms of air-to-air and potentially air-to-ground lethality, but there are caveats. Any Western fighters that could plausibly be sent would still be at risk from Russian SAMs, so would have to fly at very low altitudes within several tens of kilometers of the front lines. This would dramatically reduce effective missile range and limit strike options. As an aside, the JDAMs, which is the Joint Defense Munitions, aerial munitions, or the bomb kits that they're putting, the kits they're putting on these dumb munitions that give them extra range, are much more effective if dropped from a high altitude at a plane going very fast and towards the front line, so that the bomb, you understand physics, will have that forward momentum and will fly further and have that extended range because the plane is high, and et cetera, et cetera. But if a plane is doing that near the front lines, they're more likely to be shot down. So JDAMs are useful, but arguably also not as useful as a missile, because they put the pilot and the plane in a lot of danger. So Bronk continues. Most common Western close air support weapons like Paveway 2 and the AGM-65 Maverick require the pilot or a JTAC to use a targeting pod or other sensor to find, identify, and designate the target for precision strikes. This sort of CAS is far harder when confined to a very low level. Standoff weapons like the AGM-154 GSOW, GBU-39 small diameter bomb, or AGM-158 JSSM are broadly designed to hit fixed targets. Glide weapons are also dependent on altitude and speed of the launch aircraft for range. That's what I was talking about just then. So would be more constrained from low altitudes. So while Western fighters with standoff weapons would offer Ukraine an improved capability to destroy fixed Russian targets near the front lines from a safer distance, they would be adding to existing strike options like HIMARS and drawing from limited stockpiles. Air-to-air altitude constraints due to Russian SAMs also apply. Western fighters would offer much better range if supplied with the latest AIM 120C or D, or ideally Meteor, than MiG and MiG-29s or Su-27s with their own missile systems, but handicapped by firing from low and slow compared to Russian fighters. As such, only Meteor would likely provide an absolute effective range advantage over the R-37M carried by high-altitude Su-35S and MiG-31BM CAPs. Supplying these weapons would help the Ukrainian Air Force a great deal, but they are sensitive and available in very limited numbers. So broadly speaking, what he's saying is that giving them F-16s is one thing, but if you're going to give them F-16s, you're going to have to give them the best missiles so that they have the advantage over the planes they're flying against, and the surface-to-air missile systems that might be hitting them. And those sort of missiles are in limited numbers, and there's sensitive tech involved with those missiles, so they don't want them going astray. He continues, so Western fighters will undoubtedly provide a major boost to Ukrainian Air Force survivability and air-to-air lethality against Russian Air Force once supplied. However, they would still be at risk from Russian SAM systems and have limited dynamic ground attack options. Furthermore, they must disperse with a minimal visible ground operations and logistics footprint to avoid focused Russian strikes on air bases. This mediates in favor of Gripen or F-18 as types able to operate from rough, short fields with compact support equipment. So as good as the F-16 might be, or like as advantageous for the Ukrainians, there are better options that can be flown from more air bases, because they can be flown from much shorter runways, and that's really important. These considerations matter because Western capacity is not limitless. Logistics, training, and personnel working on jets for Ukraine is capacity not used for other things like SAMs, vehicles, ammunition. The question is, should this be the priority now, or should it wait? Interesting to think about. And obviously it'd be great to get things like the Gripen, which is a Swedish piece of kit, or any of those planes would be super good. And just before finishing, because I've split today's extra into two. It's just too much to talk about. I've already recorded. Well, I recorded the whole thing, and it was too long, so I split it into two. And then there's this. I just have to talk about this. So, two things. Okay, let's first go to tanks. So, the Wall Street Journal article has said the US is leaning on providing Abrams tanks to Ukraine. The White House is leaning towards sending a significant number of Abrams to Ukraine, and an announcement of the deliveries could come this week. The announcement would be part of a broader diplomatic understanding with Germany, in which Berlin would agree to send a smaller number of its own Leopard 2s and would also approve the delivery of more of the German-made tanks by Poland and other nations. So there's talk about, say, 100 Leopards being sent altogether. Well, this all might fit in with maybe as many as 100 100 Abrams as well. It's going to be interesting to see whether that would be the case, but I don't know how many Abrams, but it could be equal to the Leopards. That would be fantastic. When it comes to Rheinmetall, they have said, who is a company that makes them and does them up in Germany. Spokesman told German media R&D that Rheinmetall has 139 tanks, which could potentially be delivered to Ukraine. So 22 Leopard 2A4s by the end of 2023, beginning of 2024. 29 Leopard 2A4s by April or May of this year. 88 Leopard 1s. Whether that's included, any of those are included in the kind of 100 number of Leopards, I'm not 100% sure. But I mean, this is all over the socials at the moment. Just going to be fascinating to see how that turns out. And exactly what the details will be. And then we come to this. So this is a quote from Yuri Ignat, who's a speaker for the Ukrainian Air Force, saying, "Our pilots traveled to the US, the type of aircraft that will probably be provided to Ukraine, and the corresponding terms for pilot training have already been determined." Wow. So it could be that they are already being trained on fixed wing aircraft. It could be that, one presumes anyway, that there has been agreement as to what, this is what the quote is here, that there's been agreement as to what those planes are. Absolutely fascinating. So you could suddenly have a load of tanks, maybe as many as 200 tanks. Of course, the timing for these is super important. It's not like they're all going to be on the table, ready to go right now, but it could be as many as 200 main battle tanks, and then you can add the kind of T-72s and other sort of Soviet era tanks that are also being done up by over in Czech Republic. You've got the 14 Challengers, you've got the Bradleys and the Marders, and then you've got the French AMX. So there's a potential for a massive amount of equipment now being on the table. So where people were a little bit thought that Rammstein was a bit anticlimactic, actually lots of conversation comes out of Rammstein. It doesn't get decided necessarily at Rammstein, but it looks like a lot of conversation was started there and is now starting to come to fruition. And then, of course, the aircraft. Anyway, lots for you guys to talk about, I'm sure, Dan, in the threads. Let me know what you think, and then hang out for the second part of this a little bit later today. Please like, subscribe, share. Thanks for all your support. All the ways you can support the channel in the description below. And I have had a pre-recorded conversation with Orest Zub on his channel that I don't know when that's going to be going up. There's a little half an hour discussion about the sort of geopolitics of the whole war, with regard particularly to the UK and the UK's input to supporting Ukraine. Anyway, watch out for that. Take care. Speak to you later.